for Session 2, Meaningful Access to Justice and Survivor-Centered Legal Responses to TFGBV. Amanda is Equalities Now's Director for Securing Digital Rights, where she leads the organization's global efforts to advance women's rights and girls' right online and tackle TFGBV. The floor is yours, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Cecile, and good day to everyone here. I want to start this session with a simple but difficult question. What does justice actually look like for a survivor of technology-facilitated gender-based violence? In policy spaces, we often speak about laws, frameworks, compliance, and enforcement, but too often the conversation stays at the level of legal theory. Today's session asks us to move closer to the lived reality behind those discussions. By centering anonymized survivor testimonies, we'll examine the gap that frequently exists between what the justice system promises and what survivors actually experience. Through an audio narrative, we will follow a survivor's journey from the moment of abuse to the complex and often frustrating process of seeking help from law enforcement and other institutions. As we listen, our speakers, our expert panel that we have today, will help us unpack what this journey reveals. They will explore the online-offline continuum of harm, where digital abuse does not stay on screens, but spills into everyday parts of a person's life. They'll also reflect on the technical and evidentiary challenges that arise in these cases, from digital forensics to platform accountability, and why many justice systems are still struggling to respond effectively. But this session is not only about identifying problems, it is about imagining something better. If we truly listen to survivors, justice cannot be reduced to a single moment or a single court process. It must include meaningful remedies, long-term support, accountability from technology companies, and stronger obligations on states to act. Our goal today is to link together about what a justice system could look like if it was designed with survivors at the center, one that recognizes harm across digital and physical spaces and offers pathways to restitution. But let me not talk too much. I have an amazing expert panel today that is going to help us break that down. So I'll just give an overview of who we have with us today. We have Nighat, who is a Pakistani lawyer and the founder of Digital Rights Foundation, an NGO focused on cyber harassment, data protection, and free speech online in Pakistan and South Asia. We also have Cailin Crockett, who is policy advisor and senior consultant at stopncii.org and a senior advisor to the White House Gender Policy Council and director on the National Security Council, specializing in tech safety, accountability, and AI governance. We also have Sofiene, who is the policy specialist at UNDP, bringing expertise in rule of law, justice, security, and human rights. Their work involves contributing to policy development and providing strategic guidance within international development contexts. Lastly, but definitely not least, we have Paloma, who is the policy director at Derechos Digitales, focusing on policy analysis at the regional and global levels, especially on issues related to gender and technology. Just a minor glitch on our end. I'm actually just being told that instead of Paloma, we are going to have Marina, also from Derechos Digitales, who is a lawyer with a master's degree in scientific and cultural dissemination. She has experience in research, advocacy, and strategic litigation, both in civil society organizations and the public sector. This is a really amazing panel, but before we hear from them, could we listen in on the survivor narrative for a few minutes? Thank you.
Dear participants of the SVRI Forum in Mexico, in 2019, a man penetrated me after he had secretly removed his condom. I was raped. I presented myself the next day at the One Stop Crisis Center, or OSCC, in the public hospital of my capital city. Here I also made a police report at the station just next to it. Neither the police nor the hospital staff gave me any assistance, but instead screamed and shouted at me and chased me away. This was despite there being 2 social workers from a prominent women's NGO with me at the time. I went home broken, dejected, and exhausted from the trauma I had just experienced. However, things were to get much, much worse. Less than 2 hours after leaving the hospital, I received messages and calls from unknown persons. My friends and family from around the world wrote me, concerned. They had received it too. It was a copy of my rape report, an image, and it had the entire contents of my report, the description of my rape, and all my personal details. My full name, home address, telephone and personal identification number. Abuse and lecherous messages from complete strangers came in fast and non-stop. Locally and from abroad, Indonesia, the UK, USA, Australia, the Middle East, they had all received a complete copy of my report. On day 3 after my rape, it had become news on mainstream media. I will try to explain to you how it feels like being a victim of this tech-facilitated form of gender-based violence. It was as if I had been raped by one man, then gang-raped by the police and hospital staff. Afterwards, they stripped me naked and threw me out into the streets and under the bright sunlight. I'm desperately using my hands to cover my nakedness, but I cannot. They are bent over, doubled in laughter, shrieking and howling, pointing at me, calling their friends and everyone around. Look at her, look! We've raped her. Now you go. You have a turn at raping her next. The matter is consent. I did not consent to him penetrating me without a condom, and I did not consent to a copy of my police report and all my personal details being shared with the public. Every time someone views it, sees it, it is like I am being raped over and over again. I did not consent. I'm lucky. I was 39 years old when this happened to me. No spring chicken. I had worked, had a successful career, owned property. I was educated. I had many proud achievements under my belt. And still, it took so much out of me. Age 12 is when I first had a computer at home, and I was in university, aged 18, when I first got a mobile phone. I remember what life was like without the internet. It was possible. I shudder to imagine how I would have coped if it were a younger me, or a youngster today that had to go through this experience. I know why young women and girls kill themselves when this form of violence happens to them. I would like to thank Stephanie Mickelson for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. I hope my story helps you somehow. Thank you to all of you for all the good work that you do.
It's extremely difficult to say anything after listening to a survivor's experience. But we need to hear these experiences to understand the impact of gender-based violence and tech-facilitated gender-based violence. I'm going to ask our first expert, Nighat. Your work consistently reminds us that TFGBV is not a standalone tech problem, but a digital extension of deep-rooted systemic failures. In this recording, we see a devastating continuum of harm across offline and online spaces. From a digital rights perspective, how are offline stigmas such as purity or family honor being weaponized through technology to silence survivors? And when the state itself becomes the perpetrator of a data security breach, how can civil society step in to reclaim a survivor's digital agency and protect their right to exist safely online?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the panel. It was very difficult to hear this testimony and reminded me of so many survivors and victims of tech-facilitated gender-based violence that we have dealt with their stories and their complaints on our cyber harassment helpline, which is now Digital Security Helpline in Pakistan. And from a digital rights perspective, what we are witnessing is how deeply rooted offline stigmas, the idea of honor, purity, and family reputation, they are being amplified through technology. And in many societies, initially, when I started working on tech-facilitated gender-based violence, I thought that maybe it's like our society is very conservative, Pakistan, or maybe countries like in South Asia. But when I worked with more nonprofit organizations and digital rights organizations, especially feminist-led in Latin America, for instance, or Africa, or in MENA region, I had a realization that this idea of honor being attached to women's bodies and their online presence is very similar in those jurisdictions as well. In Pakistan, what we have seen is that the woman's presence online is automatically treated as public and morally judged. And even when a profile, social media profile is private, the mere fact that a woman is visible online can be framed as dishonorable. We witnessed this tragically in so many cases. Last year, there was this one case, a father killed his teenager daughter over what he believed were objectionable TikTok videos. In another, a young woman was killed because she refused to delete her TikTok account on the demand of her family. And then there is the case of this very famous influencer called Sana Yusuf, who was actually killed by a young man, a young boy, because she rejected his advances. Um, um, and and the online narratives we saw around her killing was assuming that her online presence as a influencer um, actually has brought shame to her family. And later it emerged that she was actually killed by this young boy whose marriage proposal she rejected. But the speed with which society rationalized her murder, it showed us how easily a woman's digital presence becomes ground for violence, and even when she is being killed, um, there people find justifications that why she was being killed. Um, I mentioned the digital security helpline that we have. There is another dimension that we see through these cases. This technology enabled coercion through honor based blackmail. So, women are threatened with the release of intimate images, deep fake images, their personal information, because perpetrators know that the fear of shame will silence them. In one case, a survivor shared a voice note from her brother saying, the brother was saying to the survivor that I know the picture is fake, but if it is spread online, I will not leave you alive. So even when families know that the material is manipulated, the fear of reputational harm still becomes a weapon against the survivor. And like we have listened in this audio, that the authorities that are supposed to give justice to survivors in intact facilitated gender-based violence, when they become part of the harm through data breaches or institutions exposing survivors while leaking their private information, um, only reliable actors like digital rights organizations or civil society or women's rights groups become the first line of response. And at the helpline, we help survivors by working directly with platforms to remove harmful content, providing digital security guidance, or advocating for stronger data protection frameworks, and when large-scale breaches occur. But you also asked one thing, that if we redefine access to justice beyond just conviction, then I believe that the long-term restitution this is something that we have been saying for such a long time, that the long-term restitution must center on healing and restoring agency of the survivor. Survivors need sustained medical, mental well-being support, and also legal protections against retaliation coming from their workplaces or communities or their families. And to be honest, the broader shift in how society around us talks about honor and shame, and it cannot happen through one actor or one stakeholder or through only UN agencies. This requires engagement across multiple stakeholders, from schools to media to community spaces. And to be honest, I feel the many societies are so merged, like deeply merged in their religious sort of ecosystem. So religious discourse is also something that, like maybe some jurisdictions need to consider. And justice for survivors mean dismantling the social norms, the honor, the reputation, the ones that I mentioned in this intervention, that dismantling these harms that allow technology to be weaponized against them in the first place. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your response. Just to mention that we have a Q&A function. So if any of our participants have questions, we will try to have a couple of minutes at the end of the session for our panelists to respond. So definitely please engage with the panelists, please engage with the survivor narratives, and share any other information you'd like to in the Q&A. I'll move on to our next expert, Sofiene. This survivor's experience of violence was compounded when her confidential police report was leaked, triggering a wave of targeted tech abuse. Given UNDP's work on TFGBV, including with the Korean National Police Agency, how do we handle a case where the state itself is the source of the TFGBV through an unauthorized data disclosure? From forensics and data protection lenses, what immediate steps can a survivor take to preserve evidence of their digital violence? And how can we strengthen law enforcement agencies to safeguard survivors' highly sensitive data and prevent institutional breaches? I know it's a long question, but you have 5 minutes to respond. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I will try my best. It's a really complex and long question, but I will go through some details. Please let me know when I reach out to the time. So it's really frustrating to hear the case, the audio, and also the cases that Nighat was mentioning in her intervention. So these cases shows that a reality in the society, this reality is shameful, but it is also reflected in the institutions, including law enforcement and justice. So in UNDP, we are pursuing comprehensive systemic changes to prevent and respond to TFGBV. So how can we change these realities within these institutions systematically? That's the way that we are working on in partnership, of course, with the NFPA, UNODC, and UN Women. You mentioned the Korean National Police Agency, that is also a big partner that is supporting us, to support law enforcement agencies, justice system, civil society, other government also bodies in the private sector to work on a comprehensive and whole of society approach to tackle TFGBV problems. So just mentioning this to mention that this is my insights are drawn on these experience and these collaborative experience exchanges between countries where we are working on under this collaboration and partnership, and from also a policy development. And there is a forthcoming paper that is jointly developed with the UNODC and UN Women on policing and TFGBV. So these are the sources of my response here. But what we just heard is a serious breach, actually, of the social contract when confidential information is leaked by the state itself. So the state shifts from a protector to perpetrator of TFGBV. It's a double injustice here that the victim had. The police was not, commit the initial harm for not taking it seriously, and then to intensify it through that data leak. So to address your question about systemic risks, in the justice chain, it's important to note that leaks leading to a TFGBV can occur at multiple points in not only at the police stations, through the chain. So risks exist during reporting, forensic extractions, internal sharing, prosecution files, court exhibits, also transparency of publication processes. Each stage presents a risk. We all know the Epstein files. We saw that there is a lot of criticism also about the victim exposure in the publication of these files. So despite the edits that the Minister of Justice in the US have made, there is still criticism. In addition to this, I want to mention 3 factors that can amplify these risks: digitalization, artificial intelligence and interconnection of systems. While digitalization drives the systemic transformation that we are looking at, if it is not well governed, it increases risks by expanding exposures points as survivor information moves across multiple systems, raising the likelihood of unauthorized access. Artificial intelligence also speeds up data processing and generates new information that may leak even if original files are secure. So we are using AI tools in many stages of the criminal justice chain, for transcription, for search, for reduction, for triage, or analysis, and they can generate these new data that can be leaked. Interconnection of systems also means that single weakness can compromise the entire justice chain. So let me now respond to your first part of the question. What immediate steps can a survivor take to preserve evidence of this digital violence? So the victim that we heard in the audio can take four actions. The first one is securing the evidence quickly and independently. The second one is shifting from the officers or the police station where the leak happened. And the third one is to seek legal accountability also while ensuring safety and dignity. The third one, it can also, the victim can go and seek legal action against these police officers. So the first action, secure evidence. What does it mean, securing evidence? So immediately the victim needs to save proof before it gets deleted. Keep copies like screenshots, recording, links, timestamps, stamps, file names, messages, metadata. Metadata can be the creation, modification, date or time, device that has been used to take a picture, or the camera serial number, the GPS location, software used. If the scanner, the report was scanned, she can also take the scanner ID as a metadata. She needs also to be very conscious about not forwarding the data to anyone or deleting it. So the second part, so shifting from the police station where the leak happened, so she needs to go to other internal affairs or other oversight bodies with a written complaint. Seeking legal accountability through lawyers or survivor-centered groups. She mentioned that she was with some groups, women protection groups. So that's good. And she can also, get and pursue criminal and civil or even disciplinary measures for unlawful discharge against these police. So in short, police officers are most likely to be sentenced when evidence is preserved early, responsibility is traced through access record, and the case is pushed beyond the same police station. Now, you ask the other part of the question. So
Sofiene, sorry to cut you off.
Let me finish.
Yes.
Let me finish about the last part of the question is, when we ask the survivor how to preserve evidence, actually we are inevitably placing the burden of policing on the victims. So what we think is to kind of have systemic transformation, as I mentioned at the beginning. So, and here the solution cannot be to train the police not to leak. It must be an end-to-end governance, role-based with access, very limited access, audit trails, reduction discipline, secure evidence, workflows, and independent oversight at each handoff. So I just want to mention one example. For example of survivor-centered entry points, one-stop centers. The one in Korea, for example, the National Center for Digital Sexual Crime Response, that has a 24/7 national hub designed to unify reporting, counseling, deletion support, everything, which is also connected to reporting system of the police. That reduces also re-victimization. The policing, survivor centered policing also is a very important thing that we need to work on to make these changes. The private sector also perspective is important. Automation of the protection itself. So tools like digital hashing, what we call digital DNA, that can remove the harmful content from online, can be automated also. So in conclusion, let me say that to truly address the TFGBV, we must ensure survivors aren't left to navigate their trauma alone, but are supported by institutions that prioritize systemic accountability, restore digital dignity, and guarantee justice as a lived reality, not just a promise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry to cut you off. We are running over time, but your interventions are very insightful. I'll quickly move on to Cailin. The survivor story reflected a devastating example of secondary victimization, sometimes referred to as institutional betrayal, when the state itself breaches the survivor's privacy, either through negligence or with deliberate intent. What mechanisms exist in the NCII model framework to hold state actors accountable for the real-world harm that follows? What data handling protocols should be in place in police stations, the courtroom, and other state institutions? You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity, and the survivor testimony at the beginning was just so incredibly powerful and rich and complex and nuanced. So there are a lot of threads to pull, but to try to keep my comments tight and allow for the rest of the program to flow, I'm going to really just focus on unpacking a bit more this concept of institutional betrayal. And really speaking from my decades of experience formerly serving in the U.S. government, including the Department of Justice, the Pentagon, and the White House. Really, I've been incredibly focused throughout my policy career in government, but now really proudly wearing a hat as a member of civil society on institutional accountability when survivors of crime, but particularly survivors of gender-based violence, and more recently in the past several years, survivors of tech-facilitated abuses, experience these harms at the hands of the state. And therefore, we need to ensure that policy and legal frameworks to address tech-facilitated gender-based violence, much like gender-based violence in all of its forms, need to look at sort of 3 actors in terms of accountability, redress, and access to justice. Certainly individual perpetrators of harm in the private setting, so those who are not authorities or institutional actors, technology platforms, and then also really importantly, a third category that is sadly often overlooked in the policy development and lawmaking process, which is state actors, and particularly those who are representing and wearing an official uniform in a law enforcement capacity, in a military capacity, or otherwise, representing the state, and therefore have a serious responsibility. And also, when they do engage in abuse, they profoundly breach the trust that they have with the public to uphold and protect. A little bit about the non-consensual intimate images model national framework to speak to the question, Amanda, and thank you. For those who aren't yet acquainted with this project, we're actually launching UN Women, UNODC, the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse, and the UK-based charity that I'm proud to represent, stopncii.org, will be launching a global consultative process next week at the Commission on the Status of Women to really deepen and further internationalize engagement on the development of a model national framework. The idea behind a model national framework really comes from lessons learned from the child sexual exploitation and abuse field, most notably the We Protect Global Alliance Model National Response for Online Child Sexual Exploitation and Abuse that really takes a whole of society approach to map out core concepts and principles as countries configure, mature, and develop over time their legislative, regulatory, and other whole of society approaches to preventing and addressing a specific form of harm. And given the Cybercrime Treaty passing at the end of 2024 and open for ratification by member states as of the end of this past year, we have some common ground anchored in Article 16 on non-consensual intimate images in the Cybercrime Treaty to lay the groundwork for all member states having an obligation under international law to develop a legal response to this particular form of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. And in developing that response, I'm proud to be supporting multi-stakeholder efforts to really develop this model national framework for NCII. And a really key aspect of that framework that has, I think surfaced really poignantly with the survivor testimony, again, is the need to address proactively and ahead of the facts in legislating. And in policy development and implementation guidance, this concept of accountability for misconduct by the states. Just to unpack this concept a little bit more, it's the idea that the very institutions that are entrusted by the public to support safety and justice then directly perpetrate or enable severe harms, violations of rights, and abuse. And this can apply to the ways in which survivors of gender-based violence and tech-facilitated gender-based violence in particular are re-victimized by the criminal legal system. And so when I reflect on the need for policies for TFGBV to proactively address police misconduct, I'm also reminded of my work reforming the U.S. military justice system response to sexual violence. Research has documented a profound psychological harm experienced by victims of sexual violence whose abuse occurs at the hands of the state. And whether this is a fellow soldier, a law enforcement officer abusing their power, or in the prison system, which is also sadly a site of a lot of sexual violence. So comprehensive policies to address TFGBV and NCII in particular have to anticipate state misconduct and consider remedies for harm and accountability on the back end, as well as, really importantly, set forth clear guidelines for the safe, ethical handling of survivor data so that law enforcement officials are sufficiently trained from the outset. And crucially, training not only means being familiar with data safeguarding and digital forensics protocols, but also understanding what actions are a violation of policy and an infringement on rights. Just to sort of close briefly, for previous colleague mentioned the Epstein files. I want to talk about that really briefly because it's profoundly impactful for all of us. And as someone who formerly worked at the U.S. Justice Department and then issued guidance for gender-based violence to the Justice Department from my role at the White House, it's incredibly distressing on multiple levels. But for those who may not have been tracking, the current administration's Justice Department released private images of Epstein victims published without their consent. And unfortunately, I think this follows a really dangerous and widespread pattern that we are all confronting in our own respective ways, which is the minimization of digital abuse. It's routinely dismissed as less harmful because it happens online. Yes, Maria, private images with personally identifying information. And so this reckless disregard by the state for its legal and ethical duty of care, effectively, we have the country's premier law enforcement agency engaging in the very harm that the public entrusts it to prevent, but also prosecute, and effectively engaged in the non-consensual distribution of intimate images and also child sexual abuse material. It was called by the current Deputy Attorney General a mistake rather than intentional, of course. But so many survivors have called out this hypocrisy, and really because the administration was very careful to obscure the names and identities of many of Epstein's powerful correspondents in the release. But they did not take that same care with victims, despite the fact that there was legislation in place governing the release of this information that specifically required redaction of all victims' information. And so lastly, I just would say it encourages us to also think about, particularly with this lens of institutional betrayal and thinking about accountability for the state when it engages in violence and abuse, to broaden our conceptualization of what can constitute non-consensual intimate images. Some forms of image-based sexual abuse aren't simply digital violence. They're actually real records of sexual abuse, degradation, and rape. And I think I'll say more about that in response to maybe the second question if there's time. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cailin. Actually, we have really run out of time, and we would really like to hear from our last panelist, Marina. So I'll ask her her question. But before I do that, I would like to encourage participants that have questions, want to engage with the expert panel, to please go to the session 2 chat. There you'll be able to find your panelists, and you'll be able to also engage with them a little bit further. But just to quickly rush through, and we hate doing that because there's so much to hear. But Marina, this survivor's journey shows a total disregard of the survivor-centered approach that should be deployed when responding to cases of GBV or TFGBV. When the health, law enforcement, and justice systems operate without a trauma-informed lens, it makes meaningful access to justice virtually impossible. Derechos Digitalis has recently released a TFGBV rights-based law reform guidance along with UNFPA that speaks to this. Drawing on findings from the research that informed the guidance, how can we capacitate institutions to ensure that consent is understood as a continuous right that protects a survivor's dignity from the hospital exam room to the courtroom? I would really ask you to please keep your response to within 5 minutes. We really are out of time, and I'm sorry for that. Thank you, Marina.
Don't worry. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, everyone, for the invitation. On behalf of Derechos Digitalis, filling in for Paloma, who had technical issues, but I've been working with her in this guidance. So as you mentioned, Amanda, we've just released late last year products that come from a project that we conducted with the UNFPA. So we have a paper that is called Combating Technology Facilitated Gender-Based Violence Through the Lens of International Human Rights Law, and this guiding principles for law and policy reform to address technology facilitated gender-based violence. So to have these products, we analyzed pieces of legislation on TFGBV throughout 8 countries, and international human rights law diplomas, and also conducted desk research and consultations with an expert advisory board. So one of our guiding principles, let's say, that comes from this work, stating that when countries are conducting reform on policies related to TFGBV, is consent. So one of our key principles is the idea to prioritize the survivors' privacy, safety, and consent. And that divides into several sub-principles. One of them is prioritizing the victim's consent. So what do we understand as consent? And that is that comes from feminist lessons as well, not only thinking of TFGBV cases, but consent in general. But the idea is that strengthening the definition of consent as a free and voluntary expression of will that explicitly accounts for issues relating to capacity and circumstances to eliminate ambiguity as well. So the feminist definitions of consent teach us that consent should be contextual, universal norms should be rejected, and consent should be active, should be clear and intelligible, should be informed, should be fully conscious, should be freely given out of choice and free will, should be specific to a situation, and therefore should be retractable and ongoing all the time. So when we don't have consent, and Nighat put that very well also when speaking, one of the ways in which violence and abuse operates is by removing power and control of the narrative from the survivor. So when we honor the survivor's wishes and how their story is told, we can restore their pride and their dignity. So consent actually avoids re-victimization, and that is very well stated by the very frustrating and sad case that we heard today. So consent should be considered throughout the whole case. So consent should be prioritized from the moment that the victim files a consent to the end of her case. So when we translate the consent qualifiers, let's say, to the TFGBV legislation, that means, for example, that the functioning and the consequences of every step of the complaint process should be adequately explained to the victim, to the survivors, so that they can properly understand the meaning of their decisions. So they can understand when their data will be disclosed, to whom it will be accessed, for example, as very well stated by the case, in which clearly there was not any consent. So consent should also consider intersectionality issues. So if we think of capacity, for example, or other dimensions such as age, that should also be considered. But I think to wrap it up, in order to keep it in my 5 minutes, that's the general idea. So consent, in order to do that, we need to equip capacity. We need to do to enforce capacity building on everyone that works with victims, but that should be the focus. I'll stop now and continue here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina, and thank you so much to Sofiene, to Nighat, and to Cailin. You have been an amazing expert panel. I would ask that the panelists join the session to chat, and for the participants that still wanted to hear a lot more, I still want to hear a lot more, to be honest. There's still a lot to be said, and for anyone that had questions in our Q&A and would like to directly engage with our expert panel, could I ask you please to go to the session to chat? And with that, I would like to end off our session. I'm sorry to do it so abruptly, but we've run out of time, and we have many other sessions that will be happening, and we'll be happy to continue the conversations in the session to chat. Thank you so much, and over to you, Cecilia.
Thank you so much to our speakers, and the issue you raised are central to advancing meaningful justice for survivors. So as we transition to the next half of our day, let's keep in mind that technology may evolve rapidly, but our commitment to justice and dignity must evolve even faster. With that, I would like to close the first half of the day. But before we break, I encourage you to visit our virtual exhibition booths, where partners and organizations are showcasing their research and initiatives addressing TFGBV. You can also share your reflections on the event so far via the live feed. Please use the next 30 minutes to explore, engage, and connect, and come back for the next half of the event. At UNFPA's Body Rights Campaign booth, there will be a live session on the campaign activation in Argentina, so be sure to head over there if you are interested. I am Cecilia Mwende Maundu. I've been your host, and I thank you for all your energy and engagement. Enjoy your break, and we look forward to seeing you back shortly. Asante sana. Thank you.